please. So we are going to have a break in half an hour, but beforehand, I would like to invite Thibaut Kleiner to come and join us. Thibaut, we invited you. Please step in because yes, voilà, you can. Stay or leave. We invited you because you're a senior advisor. You work really on the issue of privacy, but you're from the cabinet of Nelly Kroes, and I felt that the European Commission, and I felt it was very interesting. Actually, you would make a bridge between business aspect and legal aspect and policy aspects, and really truly today. The questioning is really the futures of privacy. You know, what are the key challenges facing privacy, whether you come from a cultural angle or business angle or legal angle, etc. And we felt that actually you didn't start the afternoon, but you're in between the two round tables, the one on global privacy governance and the other one on business value creation aspect. So I think it's interesting to hear you in this context. So maybe if you could speak for 20 minutes so we can have questions before the break. Thank you.
Okay, very good. And indeed, I'm not a privacy expert as such, so I just would like also to lower expectations in a way, but it's true that I deal with this issue in the cabinet of Nelly Kroes. And very often we are confronted with the issue of privacy in terms of how this is framing somehow the business opportunities. And maybe I should help finding out the right in my long list of files. I guess this is called this one, I guess. Yes. But I start maybe just by 3 anecdotes, which I think are also a good transition with the panel, which, by the way, I also found very enlightening and excellent. So thanks also from my side to the panelists. It was a lot of food for thought. The first one, it was a meeting I had with Commissioner Brill from the US, the FTC, a few months ago, and it was quite interesting, because indeed she was telling me that she was a bit shocked about the perception about US enforcement, because in her role as commissioner in the FTC, she was really enforcing very vigorously privacy rules. And that she felt that, there was the impression sometimes from Europe that, the US is just a wild west where, people do whatever they want with your privacy. And in particular, there are also over the constitutional rights that are attached to, some of the fundamental rules of, your freedom of speech and right to privacy. So that was a first, I think, interesting point, that maybe sometimes we overlook the nature of enforcement in the way we approach this globally. A second one was a meeting I had 2 days ago with a company called Software AG, which is actually a leading software company from Germany. And they were telling me that in their view, Facebook is illegal in Germany because they would not comply with the rules concerning privacy requirements, which, as you may know, are particularly strict in Germany. So I was a bit surprised to hear that, and also to hear that actually the government in Germany is doing nothing about this. And apparently, according to these companies, because the Facebook has its headquarters in Ireland, and therefore different possibilities for rules about how this is enforced and supervised by the local data protection authority. So again, I mean, it's another puzzle a little bit about how we approach that. Where is it happening really? And the third anecdote is from my own daughter, and I've thought of her today, especially because it's her birthday. She's turning 10, so happy birthday if you hear me. But it was yesterday. She was actually doing something on the internet, having a survey about what kind of dog she should buy. She had all sorts of questions, and in the end, when you complete the questionnaire, the program was asking some information about yourself, presumably so that they could then, contact you to sell you some products about your dog or whatever. And without, thinking too much, she actually put the name of someone else that she had invented. And she told me, you know, I wouldn't like to put my real identity on this website. You never know what they may be doing with it. So I was quite astonished because it showed that, you know, early on, the new generation also is sensitive to these considerations about privacy, which to me is important because it means that we should also take into account how citizens and how users actually can adapt and can also adjust to the new technological development. But starting from that, I mean, I think I will just skip through very rapidly through the slides I prepared this morning, because to some extent it has been already covered. Just as a starting point, I wanted to remind us, as some already did, that we are really not starting from scratch in Europe. And we've had years of experience and, you know, legal, you know, jurisprudence and so on, starting also from the OECD principles. We have the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is really the way to frame EU legislation, actually. We attach privacy to a fundamental right, which is not exactly the same as, you know, what may be happening, for instance, in the US. As someone put it to me once, privacy or data protection is more a consumer right than a fundamental right. So you may debate it, but I think it's an interesting puzzle. Then we have a series of definitions about, you know, what we mean by personal data, which is quite extensive, I would say. And it means that to some extent this issue is entering into a wide area of our you know, everyday life and how we interact not only on the digital world but in society at large. And what is also important is that we have defined in EU law, you know, that the processing of data has to be somehow regulated, which is why we have all these rules and how also we have all these authorities to do that. There are even conditions about how you may process personal data, which I think is quite interesting because it shows that already at this level, you take into account issues of, you know, interest and, you know, obligation, and also even, you know, legal obligation and official authorities. But my point is essentially about the challenges from the digital age and the new technologies. I mean, that's what we are confronted with in the cabinet of Nelly Cruz. Our mission, I would say, in terms of the European Commission, is to create a framework or an ecosystem where not only business can, you know, develop in the best possible manner, but also we can have, from a societal point of view, you know, also there, you know, the best possible delivery. So very often this means trade-offs. It means trying to find the right balance between conflicting objectives. And also it means that you need to address new challenges that are coming from the technology. And just highlighting a few, that, you know, the internet age has brought really new developments, completely changing the way we are sometimes using this technology. I mean, 5 years ago, smartphones didn't really exist. And look at us today. I mean, I think 60% of the population very soon will have one in their pocket. There is the new phenomenon of big data. I think it was mentioned just earlier. But we see that as a major transforming factor in the coming years, because there are really new possibilities for applications and developments. A nice one I heard from a company actually in working in railways the other day was that they have developed a service where people have actually a card instead of, you know, paying their tickets one in a while, and it's a post-paid card, a bit like you have in telcos. And the nice thing about it is that as a result, you know, this can be used for payment as well. You can use this card to buy things. So the nice thing is that as a result, you know, people, you know, who are commuting, you know, what they buy in the station is known. So you have the situation that one day, you know, you take your train at the same hour every day as a commuter, but this company is able to make sure that when you go into the station, next to you, when you pass the bar, there will be your favorite coffee with the right mixture of taste and how you like it. And next to it, the right newspapers that you like to buy, because they know exactly what your consumer preferences are, and they can adjust it to your best needs. That's the same essentially as to what the companies on the internet are trying to do by understanding consumer preferences and trying to propose products that are linked to that. On the net, there are also very big problems in terms of how this massive data can be combined. I mean, if you mix several sets and geolocation and so on and so forth, you can of course have a lot of information about what people are doing, what they are like, and the famous anecdote I like is the situation where apparently credit card companies can predict if a woman is pregnant or not, sometimes even before she's aware of it, because there are these patterns that, when you become pregnant, apparently you're starting buying certain things. I have no experience of that, but it's apparently, data proof. And also what is very important is that in the internet, of course, data is flowing across borders very, very easily. So you have a situation where the control and the enforcement and the jurisdiction are essentially very complicated. Yet again, I mean, Amazon, for instance, is active in Korea and in India, and there they are competing with the local telecom operators. So they complained actually to the regulator over there, because apparently the Indian operator, instead of getting the service from India to India, they make it go via South America, because like that they can degrade the quality of the transmission so that the Amazon servers appear as not very good to the Indian consumers. The reason that you can do that is because the internet, of course, is completely globally interconnected, which of course creates questions about how can you know where your data is going? Who is able to intercept it? Because it may go through some pipes, and that's why currently Brazil is very much worried about the fact that they don't have any interconnection apart through Miami. But in the internet age, you also have the issue of innovation. As I was saying, the big data phenomenon is something that is possibly transforming how we approach these services. Of course, there are trade-offs between how much data you're willing to share and how much this is impacting on your privacy. So in front of this, we have, to some extent, an existing body of law. You have new challenges. So what did the Commission try to do 2 years ago now? Was to actually develop a new framework. We had a directive in 1995. Now the idea is that we should have actually a regulation so that we can avoid too much differences, because the way between how member states have implemented this legislation, and that's considered a big issue for businesses, because to some extent, they cannot benefit from the single market at large. They have to adjust the rules about privacy and data protection to a very national setting, which sometimes creates additional costs and complexity in terms of legal enforcement. In addition, there is the suspicion that enforcement is not really at par with the legal requirements. This anecdote about Software AG was also that, to some extent in the US, maybe the corpus of legislation is not as comprehensive, but if you break the rules, indeed the FTC is coming with a big hammer and you're going to have a big fine. Whereas in Europe at the moment, you have some uncertainty about exactly how big the fines may be. So this may explain why in the new proposal, the level of fines has been clarified and made substantial, I would say. So to that extent, the question also about the draft regulation is how it will apply not only in Europe within member states, but also how it can apply to companies that are located outside of the EU. And one of the big innovations was to consider that there should be global outreach of this EU regulation, in particular so that it covers not only data processing, but also how it is done in the value chain. At the same time, there are provisions to make the transfer of data easier, provided that safeguards are put in place. So again, as I was saying, the balance is there, an attempt to, on the one hand, make the system more transparent and comprehensive, but on the other hand, to make sure that the business models can be preserved. So now I just wanted briefly, and as maybe a transition to the next panel, to tell you a bit more about the kind of issues that currently are being discussed in Brussels. As a starting point, I should say that the draft regulation is anything but adopted. It has to go through, so there was a Commission's proposal. Now it is submitted to the European Parliament and to the European Council, who are the co-legislators, and who can, of course, change and amend this draft proposal. And that's where we are right now. This has been on the table of the co-legislators with a lot of comments, discussions. People are saying that this is probably the file that has received the highest number of amendments in the European Parliament. There are currently as many as 4,000 amendments, which explains also why the file is not progressing maybe as fast as was anticipated. And at the same time, there are big issues about how existing differences between member states, can be reconciled with something which is supposed to be, a regulation, therefore applied in a harmonious but also, harmonized fashion across various member states. In addition, the most recent developments around PRISM and so on have casted a new interest in the Parliament for the issue of security versus privacy, as I would put it. So some MEPs are putting right now new amendments to question the way data could flow outside of the European Union. And at the same time, there is the big issue about what government access to private data should be and how to frame it. And there again, it is an interesting issue for Europe, because to some extent we do not have a competence on national security. That's something which is outside of the scope of the treaties, and therefore a matter for national governments only. Which, of course, when you talk about this with the US government, is to some extent a weakness of our system, because we are coming to meetings with at least 28 interlocutors, whereas the US administration has just one who can, divide and rule to some extent. So I think the working group is quite interesting at the moment. There is this bilateral discussion. But there are two groups. In fact, one is about data production, and the other one is about intelligence services, so that they can discuss about how they best can preserve security, while at the same time reconciling it with societal needs for privacy. But this is important because the data protection track is also based on an existing agreement around the safe harbors. And currently in the European Parliament, some MEPs are actually questioning these safe harbors and now wondering if it should not be either revisited or completely cancelled in order to address the worry that the US corporations are actually passing massive amounts of data without consent of the owners. Along the same lines, a big issue is the trade-off between trade policy and privacy, because there again, data flows are extremely important in terms of many sectors, be it banking, air transport, and we had an agreement some years ago about this. Being also the information you use when you ship, trades and goods across borders, and being also in the digital sector, the fact that there is a huge imbalance in terms of data flows between the US and the EU, for a very simple reason. All the over-the-top operators that are from the US have a very strong position in Europe. So Facebook, for instance, has a lot of servers located in the US. So when you use Facebook or Google, very often data will be transferred over there. And that's creating, of course, a huge interest from US corporations about the data protection regulation process right now, because the worry is that this could impede their existing business models, not only in terms of collecting data, but also in terms of how the data can be processed, where it can be processed, and what the rules and enforcement may be to this information. The most recent discussion has been also around cloud computing, For those of you who are not familiar with this concept of cloud computing, is the idea that you actually have your data and information remotely, so not on your computer, but remotely on some servers, that you can access it via the internet. Of course, this is an important problem sometimes, because if the data is located in a different jurisdiction from yours, then you may have legitimate concern about who is going to safeguard your data privacy, who is the authority that you can go to. And I think it was said in the previous panel, there is sometimes the expectations that your DPA is next to you. If the data is located in a different jurisdiction, how do you reconcile these problems? At the end of the day, this boils down to also enforcement issues. Because if you have rules on one side of the Atlantic which says, this is okay, and on the other side which says, you shouldn't do that, and you are just one company operating on both jurisdictions, what rules are you going to follow? Are you going to do, a Facebook for Europe and a Facebook for the US? It doesn't seem very appealing from a business perspective, and it doesn't seem appealing for consumers. So that's where, we have a big discussion in terms of what kind of enforcement Europe could promote, so that we make sure that our citizens get the rules and the protections that they would like, and that they are not subject to actually situations like private solutions or terms and conditions that maybe are not in line. And I think there I just would refer to the Google case currently, where Google on its own initiative somehow has decided to, in their view, improve the treatment of privacy, but has to some extent done this without having the full backing of the national authorities. So I think it would be very interesting to see what comes next, and I would be curious to hear also the view of the CNIL on that to some extent. At the same time, if you talk about the situation around PRISM, it seems that EU citizens are not benefiting from the protections that the US Constitution is giving to the US citizens. So, as someone put it to me the other day, it seems that it's like in the old good times, when in Rome, you had the citizens and you had the barbarians who were not benefiting from the same legal framework. Does it mean that European citizens, because of these prerogatives, can be just spied on, or can be scrutinized through US corporations without having any possibility for due diligence? I think that's the real question that is being discussed right now. And in Brussels, the view is that probably the data protection rules are not sufficient to deal with that problem, that you may need to have something like a government-to-government agreement to address these issues. And finally, I think that there are, in the current proposal, a series of very important questions also that are technological questions, because the concepts may be appealing, but they may be also difficult in practice to deliver. But I will start with the notion of privacy by design. I mean, this is a very interesting concept, and in principle you would say, yes, this is solving the issue, because you are asking, through new responsibilities, that someone is taking care of making sure that there will not be privacy problems. The problem is, however, that this is potentially very far-reaching, and you hear some member states complaining about a risk for bureaucratic burden. From my position, we think that actually technology can help to do that, because you can actually design, softwares, you can design new systems to actually make it easier for the data controller to also have in place processes that can deliver this. Nevertheless, there's a big challenge for SMEs, for instance, who may not have this opportunity. Another challenge is that data breach notification has been introduced in the proposal. Fortunately, we have some lessons already from the e-privacy directive, which only targets a subgroup of companies. But nevertheless, there are big questions about the need, for instance, to report within 24 hours about a data breach. Is it clear that all companies can do that? Is it clear that you can apply this to the whole economy? Here again, you know, there will be a need for new technological developments to make sure that all companies can do that. And finally, and I think this is really a good way to move to the next topic, probably. At the end of the day, the real big question in terms of the digital agenda is how you can deal with the trade-off privacy versus innovation. Because if somehow you have to ask for consent from the users before you can actually start doing something with their data, is it not the case that you are actually preventing yourself from experimentation, that you are preventing yourself from actually inventing new things, that you are preventing yourself from trying to propose new services that people may actually like if you tell them what they will be enjoying on the basis of this data sharing? And that's something we find around the text and a series of ICT companies, but not only. You know, you have also companies like you know, the postal sector, or you know, people working with archives, which are saying, look, you know, we need to be careful not to have rules which will be actually harming not only us but actually the users, because they will not be able to get access to, for instance, new services. I mean, I think the medical area is just fascinating in terms of what you may be able to do in the future. But if doctors are not able to exchange information with patients, for instance, this will be a very big you know, problem for them to do their job as good as they could. The same applies to you know, other areas like not only profiling, but you know, improving the marketing or the design of new products. If you cannot share the information, this could hamper innovation. So, on that basis, and I will stop. The Parliament has had a lot of discussion about maybe a new concept that will come in the data regulation, which is this idea of pseudonymous data. So essentially, it's not only anonymous, but it's also that you can aggregate it so that you know you cannot discover who is behind the data. And another possibility is really to enlarge the list of exceptions that could be provided in the regulation, so that in the end you have all the benefits without having the problem of privacy. I will stop there just to say that we are far from finished in terms of the regulation. As I said, there are more than 4,000 amendments, and it's not clear if this can be processed in the coming month before the current Parliament stops its activities. So the big question, I think, is whereas status quo will prevail, and at the end of the day, whether we could not still, in the current legislative framework, through issues like codes of conduct, but also through new governance arrangements between the national authorities, come to terms with these complicated issues, and hopefully in terms of the future of privacy, make sure that not only innovation, not only enforcement, and not only global outreach are delivered, but that we do that for the benefit of our EU citizens at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thibaut. Thank you for coming here today. Do we have questions or comments to Thibaut before the break? And we can continue during the break.
According to some leaks, we heard about the fact that the TTIP agreement could deal with personal data used for commercial purposes. Can you confirm this, and what can you say about data protection regulation?
In general, the data protection will not be covered by the TTIP, but it's true that there are some issues linked, for instance, with logistics that require that some personal data is handled. So I mean, that's something that is, I would say, ancillary to these discussions. It will not be at the heart of the matter, but nevertheless will have necessarily to be also treated in the TTIP. So I would just confirm to some extent that there will be this dimension, but it will not be the core of the discussions which are actually taking place outside of the TTIP.
No. No other question? Yeah, Vincent.
So we heard a lot about big data being something very useful. I'm still waiting for a good example of something which is using big data and which is useful, because so far I didn't think anything actually was well. Like what? I mean, for the traffic jam, you can say, okay, we're using your location data to predict traffic jams, and you can agree or not. That's you took the example of traffic jams earlier, and this is a good example, but you know exactly why you're using the data and how you're using the data. I mean, in all the case you mentioned earlier, in every case you always say we know what we will do with the data. You can in real time say, okay, now we would like to repurpose some of the data. Do you agree? Do you consent? Yes or no? And I don't. Okay, I'm be glad to hear an answer.
I can give you one example of unexpected results. That's your question. So something that we come up with without actually collecting the data in that purpose. Is that your question? Yes. So for instance, it was by combining location data and advertisement spendings. So two sources combined together. We were actually able to see that something that is fairly obvious, but that company was working with online on one side and retail on the other side. And by combining these data, we were able to show with them that when you advertise online, you create traffic offline, and when you advertise offline, you create traffic online. So obviously their organization was wrong, and they had to combine the whole advertisement, because actually if you do something online, it benefits to your physical shops and vice versa. So the data, it's a combination of taking data from different sources and combining them together, which is one of the big, I think, criteria of big data, is that you take multiple sources. And it's also using those location data for a purpose that was totally not the initial purpose, which was about those traffic jams. And I have more examples, but I think that really and in the future, already today, we come up with discoveries inside these big heaps of data that were absolutely not foreseen. Well, I can really testify for that. I can give you more examples. I will not, during the break maybe. But for sure, it's coming. It's already there.
No.
You may have your doubts.
Well, okay, we leave that for the break and for more discussion. I had one question regarding really the path for development of global outreach of EU, because we heard in the last panel that was a key, parameter in the coming years. How do you see that likely to evolve? Which direction?
First of all, I think that the large body of law and the development in Europe have been extremely helpful globally already. I think that many countries actually look at Europe as an example, as a model to follow. So I think that's really encouraging in general. I think the challenge is to find out how you can depart from the constitutional maybe elements that are the starting point for many countries, and try to build minimum levels of harmonization across the board. So in that process, I think that the EU is engaged into bilateral dialogues and multilateral dialogue. So I think that the process is already starting. And my hope is that there is increasing clarity about the key concepts. I think the challenge is more in terms of the enforcement and in terms of the reciprocity, where again, we will be faced with sometimes commercial interests as well.
Thank you. So for maybe other discussion, I would like to recommend we take that over the break, and we have a coffee break. And we are back at 3 for the last roundtable. So I hope you stay up to none. At 4. At 4. Thank you. Sorry. So everybody is awake. It's good. 4, thank you. Yeah, thank you.